She stood in silence while the world questioned her worth, until one shadow told the truth. This is a story of quiet defiance, unspoken bravery, and a single medal that revealed what words never could. If you've ever wondered how dignity speaks louder than noise, this story will stay with you. She didn't move, not when he questioned her rank, nor when his voice slid from mockery to something colder. She just stood there at Gate C7 under that strip of flickering LED light, surrounded by the hollow clinks of wheelie bags and muted TSA chatter. I hadn't noticed her at first. Dulles is a place of movement, not attention. Faces blur, shoulders squeeze past each other. But there was a stillness to her I couldn't ignore. A calm so dense it warped the space around it. And then the child spoke. "Why is that lady wearing stars?" His voice, high and clear, cut through the static hum of the terminal. I looked up from my phone. He was pointing not at a cartoon on a screen or a snack counter, but at the woman. The one not moving. She wore a pale uniform jacket, one I didn't immediately recognize. Not Army, not Navy. The silver stars at her collar caught the light, oddly reflecting just enough to seem alive. Her hair was pinned close, her boots dull with wear but not neglect. I stepped closer. Not too close. Enough to see what others were already watching. The man speaking to her, Japanese, I guessed from his accent, and the sharp cut of his coat, stood too close for casual conversation. His tone was lacquered in sarcasm. I only caught fragments. Symbolic appointment. Ornament, not officer. Don't confuse ceremony with command. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed level-trained somewhere beyond his shoulder, as if she were watching a plane taxi far out of reach. He pressed on louder now, enough to draw side glances. "Do medals whisper to you when decisions get hard? Or do you flip them like coins?" a woman near me murmured. Is he really saying this out loud? Someone else raised their phone. The silent lens of public scrutiny clicked on. And still Colleen Ashcroft didn't move. At the time, I didn't know her name. Didn't know her history, her record, or why she was headed to Washington on the same early morning flight as me. I only knew that whatever was happening wasn't performative. It wasn't a press stunt. It wasn't even about him. It was about the silence. Hers. She didn't flinch when he invaded her space. Didn't twitch when his voice dropped to a hiss. Medals don't make warriors. I felt my shoulders tighten. Part of me wanted her to respond. Part of me feared she might. But instead, she simply adjusted her collar 2 fingers slow and turned away. That was the moment. Not a slap, not a speech. Just the motion of dignity exiting the scene. She walked toward the jet bridge as the boarding announcement echoed overhead. Her back stayed straight. The silver medal, half tucked under her lapel, caught a final glint of light and cast a sharp shadow onto her neck. The boy stared again. His mother hushed him. The phone cameras lowered. The man, Toru, as I'd learn later, stood frozen. Not embarrassed. Just confused, as if the script in his head had suddenly blanked. His lips curled into something between amusement and irritation. I followed behind her, not out of chivalry, not even curiosity, more like gravity. When I reached the gate, the TSA agent scanned my pass with a quiet beep. My fingers clenched the printout harder than necessary. I looked back once. The terminal had gone still, not silent, just still, as if something had passed through and left the air rearranged. Somewhere above the Atlantic, silence had started to feel heavy, like a second cabin pressure. Not the kind the flight crew monitored, but something denser, thicker, the weight of words left unsaid, hanging in the stale, filtered air between us. The hum of the engines never changed, but something inside me did. Toru Shigeta had a way of speaking that didn't require a response. He treated dialogue like an announcement. Business class was barely half full on this red-eye from Frankfurt to Washington, and yet he filled it like a foghorn in a library. He started with a joke about Bundeswehr uniforms, but it bent quickly into a broader critique. You've heard what they're doing now, gender experiments in command structures. Parity over proficiency. His voice was dry, amused, like he was inviting everyone nearby to nod along. No one did. That didn't stop him. The next time Germany folds in a conflict, he continued, they'll blame it on the hormones, not the history. A few heads turned. Some passengers stared straight ahead, committed to the fiction of disinterest. Others peeked through phones tilted just so, screens glowing faintly under the cabin's cold light. I had heard worse on international flights. Political rants, drunken gripes, passive-aggressive murmurs about seats and space. But this was different. This wasn't about politics. It was about proximity. He wasn't addressing the cabin. He was addressing her. Colleen Ashcroft sat across the aisle 1 row up. Her posture hadn't changed since takeoff. Still centered, still calm, as if she'd turned her body into ballast. In front of her, the in-flight magazine sat open to an article about veterans. The page showed a folded American flag, crisp and triangular. The crease ran through the stars. She didn't glance at it. She didn't need to. A stewardess appeared, hands folded in front of her. "Sir," she said gently, "we're asking all passengers to keep voices low during rest hours." Toru smiled. "Of course," he replied, tone dipped in condescension. He waved her off without looking. My fingers hovered over my phone. I didn't want to record him, not really. I just needed to document it, in case this moment disappeared, like most things do when they're filtered through memory. My thumb hovered, then tapped. The screen lit up. Red dot. I adjusted my angle, subtle. Colleen reached for her glass of water. It was simple, stemless hotel bar bland. She lifted it with her right hand, sipped, and set it down gently. A bead of condensation slid from the rim down the curve and pooled near her fingers. Her nails were clean, trimmed, unpainted. Someone near the back whispered, "She should say something." I turned toward the voice. A middle-aged woman, maybe early 60s, clutching a neck pillow like armor. I leaned slightly and murmured, "She already is." Toru didn't hear me or didn't care. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice thick. Does that medal mean anything, or is it just part of the costume that landed like a slap, though no one flinched? Not even Colleen. Instead, she tilted her head, not much, just enough for the overhead light to graze her cheek differently. Her eyes narrowed. Not in threat. In calculation. Her fingers still resting on the armrest curled in slightly. Not a fist. Just tension made flesh. My phone screen dimmed. I locked it. My thumb trembled slightly as I slid it back into my jacket. The seatbelt sign flickered on. The plane dipped barely a notch, but enough to pull stomachs toward ankles. The pilot mumbled something about turbulence. No one listened. The stewardess reappeared this time with a tray of water. Toru waved her off again. Colleen took a glass. Sipped. Her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The bead of water had vanished. Only a faint ring remained on the tray. She didn't speak. Not a word. But the air between them felt compressed, like whatever storm had been gathering had chosen not to break, but to hover. She turned slightly in her seat, crossing one leg over the other. Her boots made no sound. I looked around the cabin. No one said a thing. but I could feel its shoulders drawn in breaths, measured eyes flickering. Toru slumped back into his seat, a smirk on his face. But it was thinner now, less sure. The silence wasn't his to command anymore. She declined the medal the first time the woman beside me said, her voice just above a whisper. Told the president she didn't earn it alone. I turned to look at her. 70, maybe older, but she held herself with a stillness I recognized from my father's generation, military, probably Navy. Her jacket was a deep navy wool, with brass buttons dulled by time, not neglect. Her eyes stayed forward, trained on the dim aisle ahead. In her lap was a folded letter, the seal partially worn, but still visible, a name stamped in formal ink, Crane. I hadn't seen that name in years. Outside, the dark Atlantic curled beneath the aircraft, like some endless velvet sheet. Inside the cabin, lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow. Most passengers were asleep or pretending. The engines murmured, and from somewhere behind us came the sound of ice clinking gently in a plastic cup. She was 22, the woman continued. It was 94. Mudslide north of Tacoma. She stayed behind to mark the edge of the debris zone so the rescue team wouldn't walk into another collapse. Her voice didn't rise or fall. It rolled. Like she'd told this story before, but only to those who'd listen. She was unconscious when they pulled her out. Broken ribs, mild hypoxia. And still she argued against the commendation. I found myself leaning in through the seats barely allowed it. She said the others didn't make it. 3 enlisted, 1 fire rescue. Said she didn't get to carry the honor without them. Her fingers traced the edge of the letter absently. The envelope was yellowing. The corners softened with years. I was stationed with her father, she added softer now. Sergeant Kenneth Ashcroft. Kosovo. 99. He didn't come back. The name hit like a forgotten draft across my chest. Kenneth. A wiry man with a dry laugh and calloused hands. I remembered shaking his hand once back when a peacetime ceremony brought the reservists and staffers together for some flag event. He had Colleen's eyes, clear, dark, watchful. You knew him, she said, reading my pause. I nodded. Briefly. Crane Elizabeth. I guessed now offered a slight smile. Then you know silence isn't always absence. Across the aisle, Colleen sat as she had for hours, spine straight, arms relaxed, eyes closed but not sleeping. The way some people meditate or keep watch. She only raises her voice when she knows nobody else can, Crane said. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the terminal, the boy, the medal's shadow on her collarbone, the way Toru had leaned in with that smirk, and how she'd turned away. And now I asked. Crane's lips thinned. She's not done watching. There was a heaviness to that sentence that made me glance at the overhead lights. Still dim. The seatbelt sign flickered once, then off again. Crane leaned slightly enough for the seat to creak. From her passport holder, something slipped, a photo, old and soft at the edges. I caught only a glance, a younger Colleen uniform, crisp, standing half-shadowed by a rescue helicopter. Behind her, a blurry silhouette holding a hand-rolled flag. The air between us grew still. Not tense, just full. She doesn't do well with ceremony, Crane murmured. But she does well with people who remember what ceremony cost. We both turned as the aisle darkened again. Toru had moved. No longer lounging in his seat, he now stood at the galley divider, one arm braced above him, pretending to stretch. But his eyes flicked toward Colleen. Measuring something. I checked the time on the cabin screen, 2 hours to landing. I wasn't tired anymore. The scar beneath his right ear sealed it. Not the drunken swagger, not the passive-aggressive jabs at policy or decorum, not even the theatrics in the terminal, but that scar. Faint, about an inch long, healed flat and pale. Not from a street brawl or an accident. This was surgical, purposeful, a line that said more than words ever could. Toru Shigeta wasn't just loud. He was trained. I sat back, spine chilled, despite the recycled warmth of the cabin. My breath fogged slightly as I exhaled. The temperature had dropped subtly, imperceptibly to most, but I noticed. Pressure change, atmospheric cue. My body registered what my mind was only beginning to grasp. He wasn't performing. He was probing. I tapped into my archived email, took a moment fighting through satellite lag and shaky in-flight Wi-Fi. But then it appeared an old thread from 2018 flagged red. TS ex-Marine liaison intel adjacent. Pulled from diplomatic rotation mid-cycle. No public file. Caution advised. My stomach turned. I leaned forward, glancing again at Colleen. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes, but her left hand rested near her smartwatch. A subtle twitch of her index finger lit the screen briefly. Pulse 94 BPM, slightly elevated. Not fear. Readiness. A signal. She wasn't ignoring him. She was tracking him. From the corner of my eye, I caught Elizabeth Crane shift in her seat. Her expression was tight now, less recollection, more calculation. She looked not at Toru, but at the small emergency curtain that separated economy from our section. "He's pacing," she said quietly, almost mouthing the words. I nodded. Toru had drifted to the galley area, back-turned fingers tapping on the counter. Not fidgeting. Mapping space. I started uploading. Opened my secure folder, tapped a sequence, and initiated backup to the embassy cloud line. It wasn't standard anymore. Most of the embassy protocols were automated now, but old habits still had contingencies. I looked down. My phone showed the red bar upload in progress. The video I took at Gate C7. The audio from earlier. All of it. Crane handed me something across the aisle. A single fold of paper. I opened it. Not a drunk. A directive. I didn't react. Just swallowed hard. Across the aisle, Colleen opened her eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to meet mine. Then she closed them again, as if affirming something. Toru turned and walked back down the aisle. He stumbled slightly, his shoulder dipping toward Colleen's row. It looked casual, almost accidental. But Colleen's hand gripped the armrest instantly. Not out of panic. Timing. The metal on her collar shifted with the motion. The overhead reading light caught its curve, and for a second it cast a warped halo on the cabin ceiling. It flickered across the fabric, distorted almost like a badge bent under pressure. The moment passed. Toru steadied himself, gave a lopsided smile as if brushing off the turbulence. But he looked directly at her this time. Not a smirk, not a sneer. A calculation. She didn't return the gaze. Her fingers relaxed. Crane looked at me. "He's not testing her," she said softly. "He's setting up something." The hum of the cabin returned. People still pretended to sleep, but a few eyes lingered open, watching. I glanced at my screen. Upload complete. I whispered to myself more than anyone. Something's about to snap, and not from her. He didn't fall. He lunged, no mistaking it. The way his heel turned, the twitch in his right shoulder. It wasn't a stumble. It was loaded movement, planned, measured, tipped toward violence. But Colleen was already there. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't raise her voice. What she did was move not away from him, but through him. Her right hand met his wrist mid-air, pivoted outward, and rotated at an angle that turned his momentum against him. Her left elbow guided his arm down while her shoulder tucked inward. It was a sequence Bundeswehr ceremonial hold, adapted for parades rarely used. But this was no parade. Toru's knees hit the cabin floor before he understood what had happened. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Someone dropped a spoon. The alert chime rang overhead. Colleen didn't speak. I stood shielding a woman in the row behind me who'd begun to rise in panic. I felt the rattle of the floor through my soles, part turbulence, part the tremor of 30 people holding their breath. Toru struggled, his face flushed, breath uneven. One of his shoes had slid partially off. Colleen's stance never changed. Back straight. One hand steady on his wrist, the other open, palm down like a conductor pausing a symphony. He bellowed a sound, part rage, part humiliation. She assaulted, but she hadn't. That was the beauty of it. She hadn't struck, hadn't pushed, hadn't even broken eye contact. He was down because of geometry, not force. Her medal still pinned at the collar, tilted slightly, caught under the strap of her shoulder harness. The perfect alignment from earlier was gone. The star glinted, casting a strange reflection up toward the cabin ceiling, fractured by the curve of plastic and air. She released him slowly, like setting down porcelain. That's when I saw it. The armrest where she'd sat now bore an imprint. Her fingers had gripped it hard enough to leave a dent in the foam. Control cost her something. I tapped my phone twice. Video locked. Sent to the security contact list. I tagged it. Live urgent. There was no going back now. Elizabeth Crane stayed seated. Her eyes weren't on Colleen. They were on Toru. Watching the way he recovered, not if he'd retaliate, but if he'd adjust. Colleen stepped back. Not far. Just enough. And then she spoke. One sentence. Calm, precise. A blade drawn quietly from a sheath. You've already lost. And I haven't moved. Toru lunged again, but this time 2 crew members were already there, one armed with soft restraints, the other clearly trembling. "We'll take it from here, ma'am," one of them said. She nodded once, no more. They pulled him to the side, guided him into a vacant row, still muttering, still flushed, but quiet now. I heard someone sob. Another whispered a prayer. The rest just stared at their screens or their laps, pretending the moment hadn't cracked the air like glass. The lights flickered above. Then the pilot's voice came through, warm and clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've contacted law enforcement and requested their presence at arrival. For now, we ask that you remain seated." The silence that followed wasn't panic. It was reverence. Colleen sat down again, adjusted her collar slightly. Her ring, absent earlier, was back on her right hand. Or maybe I'd imagined that too. She looked forward. So did I. The only sound louder than the applause was the silence that followed. Not the thunderous kind of applause. No cheers, no clapping even. But in that kind of stillness when breath catches and eyes follow one person with reverence, there's a different noise. A noise made of awe. When the cabin doors opened, no one rushed to collect bags. No one jostled to exit. We just watched. Colleen stepped onto the jet bridge first. Her steps were slow, not hesitant, just unhurried. Each motion measured not for drama, but purpose. The overhead lights of the plane gave way to natural light bleeding through the thin glass windows of the corridor. And just then, a shaft of early morning sun angled in and caught her uniform. It didn't light her face. It touched her chest, right where the medal lay. And then I saw it. Not the star itself, but its shadow, cast long and neat across the line of her collarbone down the slope of her left shoulder. A boy nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mom, look, the star's shadow." His voice pierced everything. No one hushed him. No one needed to. Passengers parted instinctively. Not with fear, with recognition. Recognition that something weighty had just walked past them wearing calm as armor. Behind her, the FBI agents boarded the aircraft. They moved without a word, no aggression, no performance, just quiet efficiency. Toru didn't resist. He was pale now. Less man, more consequence. He said something could have been a protest or just a breath, but the agents didn't flinch. They guided him down the aisle with such subtlety, it was like watching a blot of ink dissolve in water. No scene, no spectacle. At the terminal's edge stood Crane, arms folded, back straight. She didn't smile, didn't reach out. She just nodded one clean, respectful motion. Colleen returned it. That was it. No handshake, no embrace. But that nod carried more than most speeches I'd heard. I followed a step behind, phone in my palm, recording paused now. My shoulder ached from how still I'd been during the last half hour. Even the device in my pocket buzzed a reply, ping from the embassy contact, likely having received the earlier video. As we crossed the terminal threshold, a ripple of conversation began behind us. Not loud, not frenzied, just quiet threads of realization. Someone murmured her name. Another repeated the phrase. She didn't even say a word. I glanced over my shoulder. The medal had shifted, slightly tilted under her harness, no longer perfectly centered. She paused near a pillar, placed one hand gently over the medal, and adjusted it, subtle, almost imperceptible. Symmetry restored. The act wasn't for appearance. It was ritual. I understood now. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about preserving it. Colleen walked on. I stayed a step behind, absorbing the stillness that followed her like an echo. No reporters, no banners, just the reflection of a single sunbeam on the floor, stretched thin but unmistakable. I leaned toward Crane, who had fallen into stride beside me. "They saw it now," I whispered. She didn't reply. I finished the thought mostly to myself. Not the medal, the weight behind it. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and unsigned on the back. Crane held it gently, the way one might handle a folded flag or a fragile photograph. A faint stained T perhaps touched one corner. She didn't speak. Instead, she passed it to me like a relay baton. Her hands, still steady after 72 years and 2 wars, trembled just enough to make me swallow harder than I wanted to admit. We stood beneath the dogwoods that framed Arlington's northern edge. The wind had a softness to it, spring teasing through the trees. The tents for the ceremony were still being erected, their white canvases bucking softly, like sails waiting for a captain's orders. Around us, the cemetery's long lines of stone stood in mute attention. I opened the envelope carefully. The flap yielded with a sigh. The paper inside was unlined, its texture fibrous and heavy. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Colleen's. Slanted upright, not a single flourish. Direct. If they remember the silence more than the noise, I've done enough. That was it. One sentence, one anchor. I looked up. Crane was still watching the wind ripple through the canvas folds of the tents. She wrote it 2 days ago, she said. Delivered it by hand to my apartment. didn't stay. Just nodded, same as she did at the gate. My mouth was dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but words would have only cheapened it. I folded the letter again, more carefully than I'd unfolded it. Crane took it back and placed it beside a folded flyer she'd brought from the planning office. The flyer had originally listed Colleen as the ceremony's closing speaker. Across that line, someone Crane, I imagined, had written in red ink, "Declined, with reason." She said she didn't want to speak anymore. Crane continued. Said the act was already complete. Behind us, staff bustled adjusting microphone levels, anchoring banners. One of them fumbled with a stack of pamphlets bearing Colleen's face in profile, the metal faint in the shot. The irony struck hard that she of all people would become the symbol for saying nothing at all. She chose not to attend, I asked finally. Crane didn't answer right away. She brushed her fingers over the brass base of the pedestal as if smoothing unseen imperfections. She's attending, Crane said. Just not from where you'd expect. Before I could ask what she meant, a voice called from behind. Excuse me, ma'am. We turned. A young servicewoman, probably late 20s, in dress blues. Her posture was textbook, but her eyes brimmed with questions. I'm sorry to interrupt, but is it true, she asked. Did she really bring him down like that? Without a word, Crane nodded once. She did. The young woman blinked. Her jaw shifted as if weighing what it meant to live in a world where silence could disarm more powerfully than words. A gust of wind blew through, then just strong enough to lift the edge of the tent flap. Somewhere overhead, a flag cracked into place on its halyard. It sounded more like punctuation than pageantry. I stepped aside as the technician tested the sound system, unaware that the story he thought he was supporting had already shifted underfoot. As Crane returned to checking the display stand, a perimeter guard jogged toward us, scanning left and right before stopping in front of her. Ma'am, he said, catching his breath. Someone matching her profile was seen just past the tree-lined north quadrant. Watching. Then gone. Crane didn't blink. She looked at the trees for a long time, then down at the cream envelope once more. Good, she whispered. She knows where the shadow falls. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't have to. They gathered not to see her, but because they couldn't forget her silence. The memorial dedication had been scheduled for months, its details ironed out by committees and confirmed in triplicate. No official program mentioned her attendance. No press advisory hinted at a photo op. Still, they came by car, train, wheelchair, and memory. Veterans arrived in ill-fitting jackets adorned with service pins, some walking stiffly, others carried by stories etched into their posture. Families brought photos, medals, and sometimes only the ache of absence. Children in school uniforms clutched hand-colored flags, crayons still faintly marking their fingertips. A girl in a floral dress held a laminated photo of someone who could have been her grandfather or her grandmother. The morning air was brisk, the sky above Washington, D.C., uncannily clear, as if even the clouds had stepped aside. Everett stood at the podium, a single sheet of paper in his hands. Behind him, the granite base of the memorial caught the rising sun like a held breath. He adjusted the mic, the faint squeak slicing the hush. Then he began. This, he said, is not a statue. He let the words fall. It's a shadow of someone who never needed to speak to be heard. The hush grew heavier. No applause followed, only a long, unified exhale. Beside him, Elizabeth Crane stood silent, her gray coat buttoned to the top, shoulders square. Her eyes, glassy but focused, didn't move. Senator Marjean Clay stood in the front row, her usual political poise softened by something deeper, reverence perhaps, or understanding. Then the procession began. No music, no order, just people one by one approaching the granite base. A man in his 60s left a bronze star. A woman with trembling hands placed a purple heart wrapped in silk. A teenage boy, lip trembling, laid a photograph of his mother in uniform, holding a baby, him, maybe, or a sibling, long gone. Others left objects less official but no less sacred. A folded napkin with initials, a Bible the size of a matchbox, a Polaroid of two soldiers holding beers in a sandstorm. A child placed a drawing of a stick figure woman with a star on her collar. The lines were uneven. The silence was not. Then came the music, soft, imperfect. A veteran raised a muted trumpet and played taps. The notes wavered just slightly off-key like breath straining against age. The sound drifted through the crowd, not above it. Senator Clay stepped forward next. She bent carefully at the knees and placed a single white rose at the foot of the stone. The petals fluttered slightly in the breeze but did not detach. She did not linger, did not speak, did not look back. And then, at 9:47 a.m., the sun completed its arc across the planned axis. The granite shimmered. For 47 seconds, a shadow emerged, projected not by design, but by alignment, the silhouette of Colleen Ashcroft's medal. Not carved, not lit. Simply there caught in reflection, perfect in proportion, undeniable in form. A gasp escaped somewhere mid-crowd. A child pointed. Another silenced him with a quiet shh, but both stared eyes wide as if seeing silence rendered visible. Everett felt it before he saw it. The hairs on his arms lifted. A presence. He turned his gaze past the crowd toward the perimeter, where trees hemmed the field like watchful sentries. There, just beyond the last shadow of oak and elm, stood a figure. Beige coat, upright, still. No camera, no salute, just watching. By the time he blinked and turned again, she was gone. He looked down. A single rose petal had loosened and now floated in the air, drifting sideways, suspended like a memory, refusing to settle. The crowd remained still, not clapping, not shifting, just breathing together silently. Everett stepped away from the podium. He did not need to say more. No one did. The shape on the stone faded as the sun climbed higher, but something had been cast, imprinted not on the monument, but within those who saw it. And in that silence every voice was heard. I remember the way the light caught the stone that morning, not just casting a shadow, but holding it steady, as if the metal had finally found where it belonged. No applause needed, just stillness and breath. Some silences don't ask to be filled. They ask to be honored. What I learned from her is this dignity doesn't demand attention, it creates it. And sometimes the quietest stand becomes the loudest legacy. Have you ever witnessed someone change the world without raising their voice? If stories like this move you, I'd be grateful if you shared your thoughts or followed this channel to stay connected.